The woman trudged alongside the broken-down wagon, its splintered wheel groaning like a dying man's last breath. 10 miles back, the axle had given up, but Martha Hayes wasn't the quitting kind. She'd looped the reins around her waist and hauled the damn thing herself, her boots kicking up dust that tasted like regret. The dress she wore, once black, now the color of a storm cloud, swung heavy with the weight of more than just trail grit. Inside the wagon, 2 tiny dresses lay folded neat as prayer books. One butter yellow with a lace collar had a rip near the hem from where little Sarah had caught it on a loose barn nail. Martha never fixed it. Some wounds weren't meant to heal. The sun bled gold across the prairie as she dragged her burden into Silver Creek, a town whose church steeple leaned like a drunk after last call. Her knees hit the dirt hard enough to crack a lesser woman's spirit. The wagon bumped against her back, a ghost of a child's touch. Folks glanced, then looked away. Quick widows with wagons full of ghosts weren't exactly dinner conversation. The general store door screeched open, and for a heartbeat, Martha dared to hope. Instead, out-skipped the Dawson twins barefoot and sharp-elbowed as jackrabbits. The taller one, Jess, squinted up at her. "You got the look," she announced. "The kind that remembers things." Her sister Ellie reached out with fingers bruised plum dark and tucked a wild strand of Martha's hair behind her ear. Then came the voice, rough as a rusted hinge. "Ain't beggin', she's buryin'." Under the mercantile's awning stood Clay Tolliver, a man who carried silence like a second coat. His hat shadowed his eyes, but the twins lit up like he'd handed 'em candy. "She comin' with?" Jess asked. Clay just nodded and moved to untie the reins from Martha's waist, his hands careful as unspooling barbed wire. When he turned toward the livery, Martha found herself following, not because she trusted him, but because the twins' hands were warm and the road ahead was empty. Then Ellie piped up, "We got apple pie at home." And Martha's laugh came out cracked as the wagon wheel. Damned if life didn't keep kicking. But right then, with the scent of baked sugar cutting through the dust, it almost smelled like mercy. The first human touch in 3 days. Ellie's small fingers brushing hers as they walked sent a shock through Martha's body, like lightning hitting dry prairie. The group moved in silence, the only sounds the crunch of boots on gravel, and the twins' occasional sniffles, braver than any grown men Martha had known. The cabin appeared like a mirage at dusk, its rough-hewn logs and crooked porch lit by the last embers of daylight. A tin wind chime, hammered from old spoons, clinked a hollow tune by the door. Clay held the gate open, his eyes lingering on Martha just a second too long before she stepped inside. The warmth hit her first pine resin and cinnamon, the scent of a life she'd forgotten. Then she saw the cradle in the corner, its wood smooth from hands that had rocked it empty too many times. Dust coated its rails like frost. "Loft's yours," Clay said, toeing off his boots with a groan that betrayed his years. The twins, Jess and Ellie, flopped onto the rag rug by the fire, already tugging at their stew bowls like starved pups. Martha stayed rooted in the doorway, half convinced she'd dissolve if she moved. Clay's gaze cut to the wagon outside, then back to her. "You had 2. The question hung between them, sharp as a skinning knife. She nodded, her voice still buried somewhere deep. "Me too," he said, stirring the stew pot like it owed him money. "Didn't birth 'em, but buried 'em just the same." The admission was tossed out casual, but his knuckles whitened around the ladle. Martha's throat burned. 7 years old. Fever took the first. The other just quit breathing after. The words tasted like rust. Across the room, Ellie froze mid-bite, her tin cup trembling. Clay exhaled through his nose. "Found these 2 near Dry Creek," he muttered. "Stepfather sold 'em for whiskey money. Left 'em in the mud like discarded saddles." Martha's spine locked. Before she could speak, Ellie was suddenly at her side, pressing her face into Martha's hip like she was memorizing her shape. The girl reeked of campfire and molasses her ribs sharp under Martha's palm. Then twist of the knife, Jess spoke up, her voice too old for her face. He said they'd come back for us. Men with badges. Clay's head snapped up. Martha felt the air change. What men? He demanded. Jess shrank back, but Ellie whispered, the ones who bought us. The fire popped. Martha's hands curled into fists. Clay stood slowly, his shadow swallowing the room. Ain't no one taking you again, he said low and deadly. Outside, a coyote yipped, and the wind chime shivered like a warning. Martha pulled the twins closer. For the first time in years, her grief had company, and it wore the face of vengeance. The lantern's glow had barely faded when Martha stepped onto the porch at first light. Clay sat like a sentinel in his chair, his silhouette carved from the same stubborn oak as the frontier itself. The horizon bled pink over the wheat fields, and for a moment the land looked almost gentle. There's a bruise on Ellie's arm, Martha said, her voice rough with the night's unshed tears, and a burn scar behind Jess's knee. Clay didn't turn. His fingers traced the worn grip of his Colt. I know every mark on those girls, he said. Just like I know the man who put 'em there rides a bay with a white sock leg. The revelation hit like a rifle crack. Martha's breath caught he'd been tracking them. Inside, a floorboard creaked. Ellie stood framed in the window, clutching the yellow dress from Martha's wagon like a talisman. The sight of that small fist gripping the sun-faded fabric sent a jolt through her. Then movement on the ridge. Clay's body went taut as a bowstring. A rider appeared too far to make out, but the horse's gait was wrong, limping desperate. Martha's hand flew to her throat. Is that not him? Clay stood slowly. Worse. The rider veered toward the cabin, his hat gone, shirt torn. As he neared, Martha recognized the wild eyes of a man running from something worse than guilt. Tolliver, he gasped, reining in so hard the horse staggered. They're coming. The Harkin boys. His gaze darted to Martha. They heard about the twins. Clay's jaw worked. How many? 5, maybe 6. The rider wiped blood from his lip. They got papers. Claim they own. A gunshot split the dawn. The rider's horse screamed. Clay moved faster than Martha thought possible, shoving her toward the door as the first bullet splintered the porch rail. Get the girls to the root cellar, he growled. Now! Inside, Jess already had Ellie by the hand, their faces pale but steady. Martha herded them toward the kitchen, her mind racing. The cellar door was hidden under a braided rug, Clay's doing no doubt. As she yanked it open, Ellie suddenly twisted free and bolted back upstairs. Ellie no, but the girl returned moments later, arms full. She thrust the yellow dress at Martha, then the revolver from Clay's nightstand. For you, she panted. Outside, hoofbeats thundered closer. Martha stared at the gun. The last time she'd fired one, her daughters were still alive. The weight felt foreign, wrong, until Jess squeezed her hand. You feel like someone who stays, the girl whispered. Another shot rang out. Clay's voice roared above the chaos. Martha! She cocked the hammer. The cellar could wait. Some things were worth standing your ground for. The morning sun poured through the kitchen window, turning the molasses jar into a pool of liquid amber. Martha watched as Ellie carefully counted out 4 apple slices, one for each of them, her small tongue poking out in concentration. Jess, ever the protector, immediately slid her slice onto Ellie's plate when she thought no one was looking. Clay leaned against the stove, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he stirred the porridge. They'll need shoes soon, he said abruptly, nodding toward the girls. Winter comes early up here. The casual mention of winter, of a future, made Martha's chest tighten. She studied him, the sun-weathered lines around his eyes, the way his shirt stretched across shoulders that had carried too much. This man had buried children, had taken in strays, had set a table for 4 without blinking. Outside, a sudden commotion erupted, the chickens squawking, the girls shrieking, not in fear, but delight. Martha moved to the window just in time to see Jess holding up something small and wriggling. "Look, a jackrabbit kit," she crowed. Its ears trembled as Ellie stroked its back with one careful finger. Clay appeared beside Martha, so close she could smell the pine tar soap on his skin. "That wash behind the barn," he said quietly. Found the twins there eating prickly pear fruit like it was candy. Had spines stuck in their fingers for a week. His voice carried no judgment, just the quiet awe of a man who'd witnessed resilience in its purest form. Martha turned to him. "Why'd you take them in?" The question hung between them, heavier than she'd intended. Clay's gaze drifted to the rifle above the door. "Same reason you didn't ride off at dawn." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden frog, crudely carved, but polished smooth from handling. "Found this in Ellie's pocket yesterday. She'd been keeping it like a treasure." Martha's breath caught. The carving was unmistakable. Her youngest had whittled dozens just like it. Her fingers trembled as she took it. This was my Sarah's." Clay's eyes darkened with understanding. "The twins must have found it in your wagon." A beat of silence. Then, "They've been sleeping with it." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Martha pressed the frog to her lips, the wood warm from small hands that had cherished it. Outside, the girls were now building a nest of hay for the rabbit, their laughter weaving through the morning air. Clay cleared his throat. "Barn needs patching before the rains come. Could use another set of hands." He didn't look at her when he said it, just stared at his coffee, like the tin cup held the secrets of the universe. Martha pocketed the frog and reached for the dish rag. "I know how to swing a hammer," she said. And just like that, the cabin breathed easier, as if its walls had been waiting for this moment all along. The lavender-scented towel, the carefully set table, they hadn't just been preparations. They'd been a hope. The morning sun burned off the last of the dew as Martha and Clay worked side by side on the fence. Her hands, once soft from town, living now matched his in calluses and dirt. She could feel him watching her as she steadied the post, not with pity, but something closer to recognition. "Ellie had another nightmare last night." Martha said the words coming easier now. Clay drove a nail home with one sure strike. "Figured as much when I saw that ribbon." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Jess, too, sometimes. Wakes up screaming about a man with a silver belt buckle." Martha's grip tightened on the wood. The image flashed sharp in her mind, some faceless monster looming over these girls who'd already survived hell. Clay must have seen the storm in her eyes because he added quietly, "Found Jess last month hiding in the root cellar with a butcher knife. Girls barely 5, but ready to fight." A sudden rustle in the grass made them both turn. The twins barreled toward them, Jess waving a fistful of wildflowers, Ellie clutching something small and brown. "Look what we found." Ellie thrust her treasure at Martha, a tiny wooden horse, its legs broken, but its head still proud. Clay went still. "Where'd you get that?" "By the big rock near the creek," Jess said, already threading flowers through Martha's braid without permission. "There's more. Don't play there no more." Clay's voice came out rougher than he likely intended. The girls froze. Martha saw the exact moment his words registered. Ellie's lower lip trembled. Jess's shoulders hunched like she'd been struck. Martha knelt in the dirt, bringing herself eye level with them. "That's where Clay's girls are buried, isn't it?" she asked softly. The twins' eyes went wide. Clay's breath hitched, but he didn't deny it. Ellie, ever the brave one, pressed the wooden horse into Martha's palm. "We can put flowers for them, too," she whispered. "Like the stones for your girls." The simple offer shattered something in Martha's chest. She looked up at Clay, saw the war in his eyes, the need to protect those graves, warring with the need to let these new children heal. Finally, he exhaled. "Fetch the watering can from the porch," he told the twins. "The wild ones by the fence need tending." As they scampered off, he turned to Martha. "You're good with them." She ran her thumb over the broken toy. "They're easy to love." Clay studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket. Found this in the barn. He handed her a faded hair ribbon, blue embroidered with tiny stars. Belonged to my eldest. Reckon Ellie'd like it. The offering hung between them, fragile as a spider's web. Martha took it carefully, their fingers brushing. Neither pulled away. Somewhere beyond the fence, the twins' laughter rose like a promise, bright and stubborn, and alive. That night, Martha didn't dream of graves. She dreamed of wildflowers pushing through cracked earth of small hands, planting seeds in places the world had tried to make barren. When she woke at dawn, the wooden horse and the starry ribbon sat together on her windowsill, catching the first light. The morning of the supply run dawned too bright, the kind of glaring sunlight that made shadows sharp as knife blades. Martha helped hitch the wagon, while Clay checked his colt not once, but 3 times, his fingers lingering on the trigger guard. The twins scrambled into the wagon bed, their excitement tinged with nervous energy. Jess kept smoothing her too big bonnet, while Ellie clutched the wooden horse Martha had repaired for her. Halfway to town, Martha spotted the buzzards, first a dark spiral over the eastern ridge. Clay's jaw tightened, but he didn't alter course. As they rounded the bend, the source became clear, a fresh grave mound, the dirt still dark. A whiskey bottle lay broken at its head. Ellie went rigid. That's... Don't look, Clay said too sharply. The wagon wheels crunched over something metallic, a silver belt buckle trampled into the dirt road. Martha felt the pieces click together. Someone had beaten them to justice. The general store smelled of pickling spice and gun oil. While Clay traded pelts for flour, Martha kept the girls close her hand, never far from the derringer tucked in her skirt pocket. The storekeeper's wife eyed them with pinched lips. "Heard there was trouble up at the Harkin place," she said, sliding a jar of molasses across the counter. "Some say it was the twins' stepfather got what was coming to him." Martha's blood ran cold. Clay didn't react, just counted out coins with deliberate slowness. "That so?" The woman leaned in. Stranger thing, they found him, with a yellow hair ribbon stuffed in his mouth. The air left Martha's lungs. She knew that ribbon had seen its twin around Ellie's wrist just yesterday. Her gaze flew to the girls, now happily examining penny candy by the window. When she turned back, Clay was watching her, his expression unreadable. On the ride home, the twins fell asleep against the flour sacks worn out from their rare treat of peppermint sticks. Martha waited until they were out of earshot. "You knew," she accused quietly. Clay guided the horses around a rut. "Knew what? That he was already dead when we left this morning." The pieces fit now, the extra firewood, the oiled lock, the way he'd positioned himself between the girls, and that grave on the road. He didn't deny it. Some men don't deserve trials. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the prairie in long shadows. Martha studied Clay's profile, the stubborn set of his jaw, the quiet fury in his eyes. This wasn't just about protecting the twins. This was about every child who'd ever been failed. As they crested the final hill, the cabin came into view, its windows glowing like a beacon. Ellie stirred, blinking sleepily. "Are we home?" Clay's shoulders relaxed for the first time all day. "Yeah, darlin'. We're home." Martha reached across the seat and took his hand. His fingers were rough and warm and alive. Neither mentioned the grave again, but that night, she found the other yellow ribbon, the one that had been around Ellie's wrist, carefully folded in Clay's Bible, pressed between the pages of the 23rd Psalm. The next morning, Martha set 5 plates at the table instead of 4. The air in the general store turned thick enough to choke on. Martha felt Ellie's small fingers dig into her skirt, the girl pressing close, like she could disappear into the fabric. Behind the button crate, Jess had gone statue still, the kind of stillness only fear teaches. Clay's knuckles whitened around the flour sack. "You best mind your tongue, ma'am," he said low and dangerous. "Church folk ought to know better than to kick at orphans." The preacher's wife, Mrs. Holloway, according to her gaudy brooch, smiled like she'd been handed a weapon. "Orphans have families. These two were sold like livestock." Her gaze slid to Martha. And now they've landed with, what exactly, a widow who ain't mourning proper, and a man who collects strays. A glass jar shattered near the back shelves. The shopkeeper's boy had accidentally knocked over a display of pickles. In the sudden commotion, Martha caught movement by the door. 3 ranch hands from the bar W spread out casually, their hands resting near their belt buckles. One tipped his hat at Clay, a silent show of allegiance. Martha bent to Ellie's level. "Go help Jess pick out buttons," she murmured, pressing a coin into the girl's palm. "Get the shiny ones." As the twins scurried away, Martha straightened to her full height, still shorter than Mrs. Holloway, but suddenly feeling every inch the frontier woman she'd become. "You're right about one thing," she said loud enough for the whole store to hear. "These girls were treated worse than livestock, but you're dead wrong about the rest." She yanked up her sleeve, revealing the rope scars on her wrist. "This is what proper mourning looks like when you bury children alone." The store fell silent. Even Mrs. Holloway paled. Clay moved, then stepping between Martha and the preacher's wife, with the quiet authority of a man who'd ended fights before they started. "We're leaving." He tossed double the owed coins on the counter. "Keep the change." Outside, the sunlight felt like a reprieve. The twins clutched their buttons like talismans, their earlier joy dampened, but not broken. As Clay helped them into the wagon, Martha noticed the preacher standing across the street, his face unreadable. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. Then he tipped his hat and walked away. The ride home was quiet until Jess suddenly piped up, "That mean lady smells like mothballs and lies." Ellie nodded sagely. "And her bonnet's ugly." Clay's shoulders shook once a silent laugh. Martha reached over and squeezed his arm. No words needed. The message was clear. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. That night, as Martha tucked the twins into bed, Ellie whispered a confession. "I stole a candy stick." She produced the peppermint from her pocket, slightly melted. "For you." Martha's throat tightened. She broke the candy in 4 pieces, 1 for each of them, and let the sweetness linger on her tongue. Outside, Clay's axe split wood with steady rhythmic blows. The sound wasn't just preparation for winter, it was a promise. This time, they'd be ready. The pre-dawn light painted the prairie in shades of gray as Martha walked her boots, kicking up dew that clung to her hem like pleading fingers. She'd made it halfway to the old mining road when a sound stopped her, not the cry of a hawk or the rustle of coyotes, but the high, desperate wail of a child. Ellie. Martha's knees nearly buckled. The sound came again, closer now, and then she saw them, 2 small figures, sprinting through the tall grass nightgowns, flapping like moth wings. Jess reached her first, slamming into her legs with enough force to stagger them both. "You can't go," she sobbed, her fingers twisting in Martha's skirt. "You promised." Ellie arrived breathless, her face streaked with dirt and tears. In her fist, she clutched the folded drawing Martha had left behind, the one with the stick figure family. "You lied," the girl whispered, her voice breaking. "You said we were yours." Martha sank to the ground, gathering them both against her. Their small bodies shook with the kind of tears that leave bruises on the inside. She could smell the lavender soap she'd bathed them with last night, feel the uneven braids she'd clumsily attempted, still tangled in their hair. A shadow fell across them. Clay stood silhouetted against the rising sun, his chest heaving like he'd run miles. In one hand, he held Martha's abandoned satchel. In the other, the tiny wooden frog from Sarah's grave. He didn't speak, just extended the toys toward her, like an offering. Martha looked down at the twins, at Ellie's chipped front tooth from when she'd face-planted chasing chickens at Jess's stubborn cowlick that refused to be tamed. These were the daughters life had given her, not the ones she'd buried. She took the frog from Clay's hand and pressed it into Ellie's palm. "I was wrong to leave," she said, her voice rough. "But I need you to understand something." She pointed to the distant hills where her girls lay under stone circles. "That's where my heart broke." Then she touched each twin's chest in turn. This is where it started beating again. Clay knelt beside them, his work-roughened hand covering theirs. "We ain't asking you to forget," he said quietly. "Just to stay." The morning sun crested the ridge, turning the grass to gold. Somewhere nearby, a meadowlark sang 3 clear notes, like a question waiting for an answer. Martha stood pulling the twins up with her. She took the satchel from Clay and slung it over her shoulder. Then, without a word, she turned back toward the cabin, not walking ahead this time, but keeping pace with her ragged little family. The screen door squeaked as they entered. The table was set for 4, the coffee freshly brewed. And there, nailed to the wall where the cradle had been hung, the twins' drawing framed in scrap wood, Clay must have carved last night. Jess tugged Martha's sleeve. "Does this mean we get to keep you?" Martha looked at Clay, at the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly when she met his gaze. "Yeah, sweetheart," she said, pouring 4 cups of coffee. "It means we all get to stay." The 4th morning dawned with a sky the color of tarnished silver. Clay found the twins sitting on the porch steps, their bare feet kicking at the dust in perfect unison. Jess held something small and white in her palm, a chicken feather meticulously cleaned. "For her," she said when Clay sat beside them. "When she comes back." Ellie didn't speak, just pointed to the horizon where storm clouds gathered. The air smelled of wet earth and something sharper, ozone, maybe, or reckoning. Inside the cabin felt hollow as a gourd. Clay caught himself staring at the empty peg where Martha's sun hat used to hang. He was reaching for the coffee tin when a sound froze him, hoofbeats too fast for comfort. The twins heard it too. Jess scrambled to the window, her breath fogging the glass. "It's a lady rider." Clay's pulse kicked. He knew that paint mare before he even saw the rider's face, Martha, but not as she'd left. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her hair loose and wild. She reined up hard, sending gravel skittering across the yard. "They're coming," she gasped, swinging down from the saddle. "The Harkin boys, all 6 of them. They've got papers claiming rights to the twins." Clay moved before the words fully registered, yanking the rifle from above the door. "How long?" "An hour, maybe less." Martha's hands trembled as she pulled a folded document from her bodice, a bill of sale, the ink smudged, but the names clear. Jess and Ellie Dawson sold to Rufus Harkin for $20 and a jug of whiskey. Ellie made a small wounded sound. Martha dropped to her knees, gathering the girls close. "Listen to me," she said, pressing her forehead to theirs. "No one is taking you. Not ever again." Clay checked the revolver with steady hands. "You came back to warn us." Martha met his gaze. "I came back to fight." A clap of thunder rolled across the prairie as the first raindrops fell. The twins didn't cry. They just stood straighter, their small hands clutching Martha's skirt like anchors. Jess reached into her pocket and pulled out the feather, now slightly crumpled. "For you," she whispered. Martha tucked it behind her ear like a badge. Outside, the storm broke in earnest rain, sluicing down the porch roof in sheets. Somewhere beyond the ridge, trouble was coming. Clay handed Martha the shotgun from above the hearth. "You remember how to use this?" She racked the slide with a satisfying click. "I remember." The twins exchanged a look, then bolted upstairs. They returned moments later, dragging Martha's old carpet bag, the one she'd left behind. Inside were rocks, feathers, and the wooden frog. "For luck," Ellie explained solemnly. Lightning split the sky. The first rider appeared on the ridge. Clay touched Martha's elbow just once, just enough to say everything words couldn't. Then he stepped onto the porch, his shadow long against the rain-slicked wood. The twins took up positions at the windows, their faces set in identical expressions of defiance. Martha cocked the hammer. The storm howled around them, but inside the cabin something warm and unbreakable took root. This time, no one was leaving. This time, they'd make their stand together. The shadow resolved into a familiar silhouette, Martha, but not the broken woman who'd left. She walked with purpose now, her stride long and sure, the hem of her dress dusty from the road. In one hand, she carried a burlap sack. In the other, a Winchester rifle slung across her back like she'd been born to it. The twins spotted her first. Their shrieks split the quiet as they tore across the yard, bare feet kicking up clods of earth. Martha dropped to her knees just in time to catch them, their small bodies crashing into hers with enough force to knock the wind from her lungs. Jess buried her face in Martha's neck, while Ellie clung to her arm like she'd never let go. Clay stood frozen on the porch, his fingers tightening around the letter he'd never sent. Up close, he saw the changes, the sunburn across Martha's nose, the new calluses on her hands, the way her eyes held something fiercer than grief now. "You came back," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Martha stood keeping one arm around each girl. "Turns out Kansas wasn't far enough to outrun what matters." She hefted the burlap sack. "Brought supplies and information." Inside the cabin smelled of fresh bread and the lavender sachets Martha had left behind. She unpacked the sack with deliberate movements, a box of 44 cartridges, a jar of honey, 2 hair ribbons in deep blue. Finally, she pulled out a folded newspaper. The headline blared, "Harkin Gang wiped out in shootout near Dodge City." Clay's breath caught. "You didn't pull the trigger," Martha said quietly. "But I made sure the law knew where to look." She met his gaze. "They won't come for the girls again." The twins were unusually still, their eyes darting between the adults. Finally, Jess whispered, "Are you staying?" Martha reached into her pocket and placed the smooth stone on the table, the one with "come back" scratched into its surface. "That depends," she said, looking at Clay. "You still setting a place for 4?" Clay didn't answer with words. He simply walked to the cupboard and pulled down an extra plate, the one with the chip on the rim that Martha always used. The twins exploded into motion, Ellie dragging Martha's old chair back to the table, while Jess unearthed the cherry candies from their hiding spot. As the first stars appeared outside, the cabin filled with a sound. It had been missing laughter, bright and unguarded, rising like smoke through the rafters and out into the wide prairie night. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote yipped in answer, but no one inside heard it. They were too busy coming home. The fire crackled low as Martha washed the supper dishes, her sleeves rolled up to reveal the new scars on her forearms, thin white lines from barbed wire and hard travel. Behind her, Clay dried each tin plate with deliberate care, his shoulder brushing hers whenever he reached for another. The twins, supposedly asleep on the rug, were whispering through their shared blanket. "Did you see?" Ellie's voice carried in the quiet. "Her boots by the door again." Jess's reply was smug. "Told you she'd come back." Martha's hand stilled in the wash basin. She'd expected questions about where she'd been, why she'd left, not this quiet acceptance, as if her return was as natural as the sun rising. Clay set the last plate on the shelf. "Girls," he said without turning, "either go to sleep or help with the mending." Giggles, then silence. Martha wrung out the dish rag, watching water spiral down the drain. "You never asked where I went." Clay hung the towel to dry. "Figured you'd tell me when ready." He reached above the hearth and took down a small wooden box she'd never seen before. Inside lay a single bullet, tarnished with age. "My wife's," he said simply. "Found it in her apron after the fever took her. Never could bring myself to fire it." Martha touched the cold metal. "Why show me now?" "Because you came back carrying more than supplies." His calloused thumb brushed the healed rope burns on her wrist. "And I reckon that bullet's seen enough waiting." Outside, a coyote howled. The twins murmured in their sleep, their small bodies curled together like parentheses. Martha studied the man before her, the way his eyes held entire storms without spilling over, how his hands could be both gentle and lethal. She reached into her pocket and placed 2 items on the table, the Kansas newspaper and a small frayed photograph of her daughters. "I went to bury more than ghosts," she said. "I went to learn how to stop running." Clay picked up the photo, his fingers careful at the edges. "Did you?" Martha looked toward the twins, their faces peaceful in the firelight. "I think I'm starting to." The wind picked up outside, rattling the spoons on their string. Somewhere in the night, an owl called. Clay didn't move to latch the door. For the first time in years, neither of them felt the need to guard against what the darkness might bring. Come morning, they'd find the twins had migrated to the loft in the night, curling up on Martha's old cot, like it was where they'd always belonged. And on the table set, for 4, without discussion, the coffee would be strong, the bread warm, and the sunlight would fall across the floorboards in a way that made the whole cabin feel like a promise kept. The word Mama still hung in the air, like the last note of a hymn, when Martha felt Clay's calloused fingers brush against hers beneath the table. Neither pulled away. The twins, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, were already arguing over who got the blue button with the star pattern. That afternoon, while the girls napped in a sunbeam, Martha found Clay in the barn, repairing a harness. Sawdust clung to his shirt front, and sweat darkened the brim of his hat. Without a word, she picked up the spare awl and began stitching the torn leather strap. They worked in silence for a while, their movements falling into rhythm, pull-punch-pull, until Clay spoke. "Preacher's coming through next week." Martha's needle stilled. "That's so? Figured we might need him." He kept his eyes on the harness, but his voice was steady. "For the girls' sake, make things proper." A crow cawed from the rafters. Martha studied the man before her, the way his sunburnt neck curved over his work, how his wedding band still gleamed faintly on its cord beneath his shirt. She reached out and turned his face toward hers. "Only if you want it for you, too." His exhale stirred the sawdust at their feet. "Been waiting 15 years to hear someone call me Pa again." The admission hung between them, raw and sacred. Outside, a sudden gust set the wind chimes singing not the mournful clatter of before, but something brighter, like laughter. That evening, Martha took the twins to the cedar cross. The girls placed small stones at its base, one painted with yellow flowers, the other with a crooked heart. "For your other daughters," Ellie explained solemnly. Jess added a feather to the pile. "So, they can fly if they want." As twilight painted the prairie gold, Clay appeared carrying a post hammer and a weathered board. Without ceremony, he nailed it to the crossbeam. The carved letters stood out stark in the fading light. "Sarah and Emily, Hayes beloved." Martha traced the names with trembling fingers. When she turned, Clay was kneeling in the grass, helping the twins plant wildflower seeds around the marker. His hands, so capable with rifle and reins, were tender as he guided their small fingers into the earth. Back at the cabin, Martha lit every lantern against the gathering dark. The girls fell asleep mid-sentence, their button treasures clutched in sticky hands. Clay banked the fire while Martha folded the quilt around them. "You know," he said quietly, "that preacher will likely ask if we love each other." Martha looked at the twins' peaceful faces, then at the man who'd built a home from grief and kindling. "Tell him the truth," she said, blowing out the lamp. "We built something better than love." Outside, the wind chimes sang their tinny hymn. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote answered. But inside the quiet was the good kind, the kind that comes when all the ghosts have finally been given names, and the living can rest easy. The preacher came on a Tuesday, his black coat dusty from the trail. He stood awkwardly in their kitchen, fumbling with his Bible, as the twins peeked from behind Martha's skirts. There were no flowers, no fancy dress, just 4 sets of work-roughened hands clasped together over a well-worn table. When the preacher asked, "Do you take this woman?" Clay didn't recite pretty words. He simply placed a worn harmonica on the table, the one his first wife had given him years ago. "Reckon that says yes, better'n I could," Martha answered by unfolding a yellowed handkerchief embroidered with her daughter's initials. She tucked it into Clay's breast pocket, her fingers lingering over his heart. The twins, impatient with grown-up silence, broke the moment by showering the couple with chicken feathers they'd collected secretly for weeks. That night, as a half-moon rose over the prairie, the new family sat on the porch, sharing a single slice of dried apple pie. Ellie fell asleep with her head in Martha's lap, while Jess traced the scars on Clay's knuckles with solemn curiosity. Inside, the wind chimes played a lullaby. The cedar cross stood watch in the field, and the fourth plate at the table, the chipped one, no longer waited empty. Somewhere beyond the fence line, coyotes sang to the stars. But in that small cabin, with its mended windows and patched roof, something unbreakable had taken root. Not a fairy tale, not a perfect ending, just a home built, stitch by stitch, like a quilt made strong enough to weather any storm. The next morning, Martha would find a new carving on the porch rail, 4 initials entwined with a heart. She wouldn't mention it, just as Clay wouldn't mention the way she'd started leaving his coffee to brew an extra minute the way he liked it. Some things didn't need words, they just were.